Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw the international debut of Dune, and it actually did a lot better in those international markets, which it is open much better than they expected, at about almost twice as much as what was being projected to make. Also, Shang-Chi continues to have very strong domestic performances and is well on its way to reaching that minimum amount it needs to break even, and likely also go past that to make a little bit of profit, which still isn't really a whole lot as far as the entire scheme of the MCU, because it's still going to be one of the lowest grossing as far as net gain, net profit films in MCU history. But then again, we do of course have pandemic times and theater closings, that kind of stuff, that are indeed a part of the equation there. And also the international marketplace just really not showing up for that movie. And we have a couple other updates as far as movies coming into their second weekend and can make some predictions and projections on, and also of course our normal talk of movies in general. But before going any further, please make sure that you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey. Also make sure you subscribe to the channel with that bell notification on, that way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. Still have no idea how I get through that, only stumbling a couple of times. Anyway, we'll go ahead and first dive into the big news, which I know a lot of people are excited about, because one of the only films left on the release calendar for this year that most people in general are excited for as far as movie fans are concerned, nerd movie fans especially, is Dune. Dune looks like a movie that is making a lot of people excited, and a big piece of evidence to suggest that is the fact that it has made $37 million in its early offshore debut. It debuted in around 16 markets. It was originally going into the weekend expected to make around $20 million. And so as you can see, it's pretty much doubled what they had expected it to make. So it is definitely overperforming in those markets. However, still far too early to tell whether or not this is a good sign for the film long term, because the film did cost around $165 million production budget. When you add on top of that the marketing costs, you're looking at north of $225. So the film needs to make roughly $412 million to break even worldwide, which again is doable, especially with a strong early start. And if their model, which they seem to be attempting here, of getting the film out early internationally where there is not HBO Max, which limits the types of copies of the film that will be pirated, meaning that you're not going to have as much piracy. Again, you'll have the standard amount of piracy that you're always going to get, but you're not going to get those pristine copies that you'll get as soon as it's live on HBO Max. Might be able to make enough people excited if the word of mouth is good, which means when it eventually does come out in other markets, including in North America, that you'll have enough people wanting to go see this film actually in theaters or on HBO Max without pirating it, and that could result in it doing well at the box office. Again, we still have to wait and see exactly what those numbers look like, especially North American, because this could be a very huge success internationally, but also be a huge, disappointment domestically. And we all know domestic numbers are a lot more important to studios because you get a lot more of that money back, especially in those first couple of weeks. All in all, right, studios get around 60% of the entire box office, but it all just depends on how much of the pie, or what piece of the pie is in which country, because as we all know and have mentioned previously before, if you have a lot of a huge piece of pie, for instance, love this talk of pie, now I'm hungry, talking about as China is concerned, we know that you get very little investment, you get very little return on that investment, and so you could have a film make $300 million worldwide, but if $200 million of that is in China, then it means nothing, because they only get 25% of that number. So that's another thing to kind of always to keep in mind. And Dune has officially been announced to get a release in China. Someone tagged me on that earlier. So again, thank you very much for doing that. And I retweeted it. And it is something that I think is important to recognize, though, because films like Dune, and also I believe it was No Time to Die as well, officially got a China release date. And that is important for a couple of reasons. One, because it means that those worldwide numbers are going to automatically look a lot higher, because those numbers are going to be coming from China, are going to look pretty good. Two, actually three things. The second thing is that is also fool's gold, because it's going to make the film look more successful than it actually is, because if there is a huge number from China, because they get very little back on that, again, $100 million sounds nice, but when you only get $25 million of that $100 million, not nearly as nice. And thirdly, it also reminds us that the studios, including Warner Brothers, not just Disney, continue to work with the commies in China, and 75% of the money made by this movie will go to the communists who are in charge of Uyghur concentration camps, among other human rights violations. And I will always remind people of that, regardless of who the studio is or whether I like the film or not, because it is important for us to point those things out and to try and call that nonsense out when we can. So, going into the numbers, as far as the domestic numbers for the weekend, as you can see, Shang-Chi came in with a 37% drop in its third week. So again, for a third week, that is a very good drop. This film has been having some very strong holds from week 1 to week 2 and now to week 3. The film is now at around $176.8 million domestically. This film is then very likely going to reach $200 million, maybe even a little bit more than $200 million by the end of its entire run. It was also able to make enough internationally for this film to be well on its way to that break-even point, as I had mentioned previously, losing 230 screens this past weekend. But again, a very strong start. Remember, or rather, a very strong hold. Remember that next week, the only other major release coming out is Dear Evan Hansen, which might get the musical theater crowd excited, maybe some teenagers, but in all is not going to be much competition for a film like Shang-Chi. So if we see another similar 30 to 40% drop once again, and this film makes another, $14 million in its fourth week, we can see that that is going to help this film a lot. Again, add on top of that what it makes throughout the week, which is always going to be, or is again likely going to be well over $1 million every single day. You're seeing why this film is very much going to have a very strong chance of getting to the $200 million domestically, which is a very rare feat these days, but also why internationally, if it continues to make any money at all, as we've seen, the huge success of Dune has not taken away from people going to see that, though, of course, it has not been doing as well in the international marketplace. It's, again, a very important thing to note. We are still seeing the film doing well enough where breaking even and making some profit is very likely. Someone who I won't name necessarily, but you know who you are, has been kind of fighting me on this to say that this is not going to happen. And here's my evidence. The film made is now over $300 million worldwide and is, again, less than $25 million away from $200 million domestically. So your arguments are starting to become much less reliable. Anyway, let's go ahead and dive into it. So as I said, Shang-Chi, this is actually not a very accurate number. The numbers is typically behind on these things, and it always kills me whenever they force me to have to go to boxofficemojo.com, because ever since they had their redesign, it just looks disgusting. Like, if you remember the old Box Office Mojo, it was awesome. It was so cool. You could do so many things there, and now a lot of those features are either gone completely or behind a paywall, and it's just not worth it. But Shang-Chi has indeed made over $320 million worldwide. As you can see, that domestic-international split is the biggest reason why this film is on the pathway to making money. It's not doing much internationally for a Marvel film or for any big-budget film for that matter, but for the domestic market, especially during COVID time, that is a very strong showing there. If I had to guess, talking about Dune again for a second, if I had to guess, I would think internationally we might see a reversal of this. I think that Dune could have a 55% international, 45% domestic, not doing as well domestically, but doing better internationally. I could totally see that happening, getting similar numbers if, hopefully, my big hope, of course, is that it would do better based on everything that I'm hearing about the film being a really good, not just adaptation, but just a good film to boot. So, again, $320 million for Shang-Chi, definitely on pace to make its money back. It's now within the $30 million loss territory at this point, like as of today. So that's the kind of money that you can easily make up with Blu-ray and 4K sales. So it's very much on the path. 3 weeks in, it's going to be able to get much closer than that even if this film somehow barely misses out on that break-even number, it's going to be able to make its money back through Blu-ray and 4K sales. That is a fact at this point. Free Guy continues to do well, almost at $300 million worldwide. Again, the little engine that could. But the big thing that we have to remember about this movie is that it did get a late release in China, and that has had a big impact. This film so far has made $76 million in China. So that is a very important factor, because without that number, the number, as far as profitability is concerned, does go down. This film has officially now gone into the black if you look at the chart, but if we remember that China is the biggest reason why it is in that place, we start to realize very quickly that the number is probably not in the black, but just like I mentioned with Shang-Chi, with Blu-ray 4K sales, it's in that territory of it's going to be able to make its money back, if not directly from the box office, if we were to further adjust those numbers, if we were actually to go country by country, breaking those things down in that way. So again, Free Guy doing incredibly well here. We have Cry Macho, which just came out. I actually saw it yesterday, so I'm going to do a review on the channel sometime this week for it. Overall, not a huge fan of it. Very weak writing. Also, just the young actor they had to play the kid alongside him, I don't think was the best. He was definitely very green, and it was very much showing there. And the ending just kind of comes and goes. It's just very anticlimactic, and it's very much, I think, a sad sign that Clint Eastwood's likely getting towards the end of his directing career, which is sad because we were talking about this on a live stream the other day. It's crazy to think that back in 2019, so back when he was still in his late 80s, early 90s, he was able to make a film like Richard Jewell, which was fantastic. And then he also still makes films like this, which are not as good. And as you can see, $4.8 million. This is day-and-date release on HBO Max, and so it does make sense. But also, this is a smaller budget, $33 million budget film. And so this is kind of the story of most small-budget films nowadays. Malignant in its second weekend up to $24 million. This film, again, we can talk about the profitability of the film in just a second. Cop Shop is the other new film that came out. I've heard some good things as far as people liking the overall story, thinking it's fun and crazy. Can't find a budget yet on this movie, but I would imagine it's probably under $50 million if I had to take a guess. Still also not doing very well, only $2.3 million domestically. So even though people seem to be liking it, not doing a whole lot there, and I don't know if this film is on any streaming service as of yet, as this is coming through Open Road, is the wide release for it. And as far as Open Road is concerned, I'm not sure what streaming service it would be on, if any, for that matter. I'm trying to see any other of the films that have come out in the last few months. Hard to say at this point. But anyway, that is the state of Cop Shop for anyone who has been a fan of that. Going to my charting now, as I mentioned, Dune not yet getting a full release, so the tracking on this film is going to be a little bit more difficult. I'm not going to be able to do my typical projections. That goes for No Time to Die and for Dune, since they're getting this very slow rollout. But what I can say is that with the $36.8 million it's made so far, assuming the 60% cut of studios getting it by the end of its run. So again, even though right now that number wouldn't be accurate because the numbers are different, the cuts are different depending on the countries that they're in, we're just, for the sake of simplicity, again, arguing that whatever is in this category is what the end result is, which is why we have what the current gain, current loss would be if things were to end today. So as you can see, $36.8 million would put the film at negative $225.4 million. So even though it is a strong start, clearly it does have a very long way to go, and that is something that cannot be forgotten. Cop Shop, as we can see, $4.8 million made for Cry Macho, so that's at a negative $46 million loss. I don't know if this film's going to be able to make much because it's not going to do much internationally, and it is not seemingly doing much domestically, especially with HBO Max cutting into those numbers. So this is a film that likely will be a small financial loss just because they didn't put a lot of money into it with only a $33 million budget, $49.5 million when you add in marketing. Cop Shop made $2.6 million, and as I said, cannot find a $2.6 million, cannot find a budget yet for this, so I cannot say whether or not this film will flop or not. However, if it costs anything near or even more than what Cry Macho did, then we kind of already have an idea of what that fate might be. So let's talk about some of the films that we can predict. And so right now we can predict Malignant, which was the only film to have a second week number, coming at $24 million, means the film likely will make somewhere between $35 and $49 million based on historical standards, meaning based on the fact that it costs $40 million, it will make, or rather lose, somewhere between $38 and $30 million. So best case scenario, it loses $30 million. Worst case scenario, it loses $38 million instead. And actually, as of right now, I have not updated the number yet in this current category, but this is based off of that $24 million 2-week total. So that is going to be, again, the where it likely will end up by the end of its run. As of right now, it's probably somewhere around $40 to $45 million in the red, so it's definitely in that territory as far as the film is concerned. $320 million for Shang-Chi, so again, negative $32 million is what I was saying before. My projections after the first 2 weeks said it's going to lose either $4 million or make anywhere upwards of $84 million. I'm still, again, because I stick myself to that 2 week, just that way you can see how well or how how not well my projections did. So I'm sticking with those numbers. And so that is what is likely to happen historically. That is what most films, especially big budget films, tend to do historically, but it's not always the case. This film, though, being now at negative $32 million, is inching ever closer to profitability. As I said, it is now within that range of Blu-ray and 4K sales being able to make that up. It is now also at the point of around 80%. So the first 2 weeks accounts for 80% of its entire box office. So I would not be surprised if by the end of its run, it falls into the 70s range and possibly even to the 60s range, which, if you remember, means the film would likely make anywhere between either $368 million minimum or $515 million maximum. It's not going to get anywhere near this based off just the fact that it's not doing anything internationally. It would need a very strong hold internationally like it's seeing domestically, which is just not happening right now. So we're likely going to see it closer to that 368, which is why, as I said, the fact that it only needs to make 375 to break even, this film is very much well on pace to either break even or get close to breaking even, I would say probably in the next 2 weeks. I would say probably in the next 2 weeks, we'll see this number reach or get very close to that break-even number. So very much by the end of its run, it's pretty much mostly a foregone conclusion unless somehow Dear Evan Hansen just destroys it next week, which is just not very likely at this point. The last bit of news I can talk about is Candyman. So remember, Candyman came out a few weeks ago. That film was set to make anywhere between $71 and $100 million. That film, as we can see, up to $66 million, is now actually in the profitable territory, which is what was projected. It was expected to make anywhere between $5 and $22 million in net gain profit, and it is already at that point of $2.5 million. So it's at the very least going to hit this minimum number that I had, and is looking very comfortably to get somewhere close to the average $13.9 million, if not more. But again, as more and more movies come out, it'll be a lot harder for smaller releases like this one, which might have good holdovers or good initial numbers, but just doesn't make or is not getting enough people to really come to go see it to make crap tons of money. Still, having any type of profitability whatsoever in a market like this, especially when the movie was $25 million, is actually still impressive because not every low-budget film has made money this year. Just go ahead and look at this other $25 million film, which was Don't Breathe 2, which at this point has not made its money back and was projected not to make its money back. But hey, it is definitely on the higher side of performance, seeing that it is right now currently performing at that average rate that I had broken down initially. But anyway, those are the box office numbers. What are your thoughts? Do you think that Dune has some life in it? Again, coming in with around $40 million internationally, which is, again, double what the initial estimates were. Also, Shang-Chi topping $320 million internationally, definitely putting this film in a good position to be able to reach that break-even part. Let me know your thoughts about these things and any of the other films that I talked about or mentioned in the comment section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching on Odyssey. Really does mean a lot. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my September Locals, Patreon, and Subscribe Star members. First with my Locals members, Cats App, D Sharp, It's a Modern Major General Story, Laura Bifford Hobbit, and Robert Barnes. I want to give a shout out to, especially to Laura, who is now a double supporter on Locals and on Patreon. So thank you for that. And to all of my Locals members. A shout out also to my Patreon members, Andrew Hoyle, animation commentator Brandon, Brian P., Christopher Bowman, Don Bruno de la Mancha, Father Christopher Miller, Hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Hannibal Grimm, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toon, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Gomer Kyle 79, Laura the Modern Major General Story once again, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mondo Spieler, Mr. Peabody, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Rosetta Ullen, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina Bojan, and Tina B., the Empress of the Universe. And a shout out also to my Subscribe Star members, The R, Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, John B., Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK Man. Thank you all very much for supporting the channel. And I want to give a huge shout out to new members, one-time supporters over on Locals, Kara Tharp, K Tharp, 56, and Brett D90. Thank you again for being a one-time supporter over on Locals, and also to my newest Patreon member, Stan Gunovic. And hopefully I pronounced that correctly, but thank you for being my newest members. It really does mean a lot. And if you want to have your name shouted out at the end of every single video or live stream on the main channel, please check out the links in the description below, specifically that top link, which will bring you to all of the links to my various social media pages and also places of support as well. And remember that if you join at the Army of Asgard level, you also get access to giveaways of 4K titles. Right now, I have a live giveaway of Snatch on 4K Steelbook. I've also got ones for Dread, Wrath of Man Blu-ray. I've also got A Quiet Place Part 2 on 4K. I've got Top Gun on 4K, Sicario on 4K, tons of films and more to come, especially as more films are getting released for those giveaways. At the Keeper of the Bifrost level, you get all of that, plus you get access to an exclusive podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger. Not only do you get to listen to the podcast, you also get to ask questions that we answer as much as we can and as fully as we can in a much more, I guess you could say, uncensored way, but again, a much more free-flowing way for our members over there at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. And if you join the Chosen of Valhalla level, you get access to all of those things, plus in your first month, you get a free t-shirt, your choice, and I send it to you no matter where you are in the world. And also, you get to once a month be featured on the channel in the Chosen of Valhalla live stream, where we talk about movie, news, and pretty much anything that you want to talk about. So if that all sounds like fun to you, check out those links below. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.